Let's go ahead and start. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Charles Shapiro, the President of World Affairs Council. Welcome to our Zoom program this afternoon with Dr. Jagdish Sheth on the future of brick-and-mortar retailing. This program is brought to you in part by the UPS Foundation and the Atlanta Global Studies Center. We're going to use the internal chat function on Zoom for questions. So if you've never used this before, put your cursor down to the bottom of the screen and you'll see something comes up that says chat. If you click on that, you send questions to Fernanda Lucchine. She will combine questions, edit out those of you who are angry at me for some reason. Then she'll send them to me, and here's the key part. She's going to send them to me in all caps so I can actually read them. And I'll ask those questions to Dr. Sheth. We'll start the questions in about a half an hour. So I hope you've got some great questions. Dr. Jagdish Sheth goes by Jag Sheth, like the automobile. He holds the Charles H. Kelstadt Chair in Marketing at the Goizueta Business School at Emory University. He is a World Affairs Council board member, a friend and mentor to me and to many other people. So Jag, welcome. It's a pleasure having you here today.
Thank you, Charles. Such a great friendship, good conversation. This should go very well.
Good. I'm looking forward to this. So for the purpose of this conversation, what do you consider to be retailing? I mean, when most of us, when we think of retailing, we think of stores selling clothes or electronics. What is retailing?
The retailing is redefined in a broader way. You have the typical shopping centers, the shopping malls, you have the grocery stores as a retailing, but they're adding now more and more services. Fast food franchises would be a retail also, for example, and banking would be a retail, there would be retail banking, for example. So industries are expanding from selling merchandise alone as retailing to also selling services as retailing.
Okay, so I mean, this is a terrific week to talk about retailing. Last week, Neiman Marcus, which at one time was, the dominant high-end retailer with their fabulous Christmas gift each year, declared bankruptcy, as did J. Crew, which is, I think, in every shopping mall in the country. What's going on? What's happening?
The decline in the shopping center-based retailers was in place. For example, as of December 31st, 2019, beginning of 2020, for example, 9,300 retail shops had closed down, which was a trend that began 6,000 before, 5,000 before. So there has been a brick-and-mortar retail stores closings. Anyhow, it was taking place. We will try to explain why that happened. So large chains were the major casualties, where you had thousands of stores. So Payless Shoes, for example, simply said, we cannot do it anymore. Radio Shack some time ago actually announced the same thing. They were very big retailers at one time in terms of offering the electronics, components and products and all the stuff. So you have the Toys R Us, for example. It was continuing as a journey. The coronavirus actually did the last push pretty much. It declined even more further, not limited to the department stores. There's a reason why the failure of large multi-location retailers, shopping center anchored happen is very different than what we think. With cheap money coming in from QE2 time periods, 2008, 2009, all of them ended up borrowing a lot more money than they should have. And therefore, the stock market price that was going up, for example, so you have a debt to equity ratio, you borrow more money is cheaper to borrow, and therefore you try to create what is called a weighted average cost of capital between your own equity cost of capital, which is the dividends that you pay, for example, and the debt. Since the debt was so cheap and the bankers were willing to loan money, they suddenly overloaded themselves. So if you look at the collapse of these things, it is because they just were too aggressive in their growth strategy.
I'm going to when I tell everybody, you can turn up the volume on your computer. So
me try to do that. So I thought I did it. Okay. Oh, hold on.
Uh-oh, come back. Goodness. Have we lost Dr. Sheth, or am I the only one who's lost him?
No, Ambassador, it looks like he dropped off. Can you give him a call and make
Yeah.
sure he can hop back on?
Okay, well, he's got, his phone is going straight to answering. So everybody please be patient. Here he's coming back. Good. We need to unmute him.
Can you hear me better now?
Yes. Well, you can see you better now too. I'm glad you're back. For a minute there, I'd lost you.
I'm so sorry. Yeah, I felt that.
No problem.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so let's continue. I apologize. We got a little bit off track by that. But what you're saying is that the COVID pandemic is simply accelerating trends that were already underway.
Exactly. And the reason is that the real casualty of the brick and mortar retailing has been the online procurement, online commerce, market exchange, which says that there are multiple levels in retailing that takes place from the producer to the consumer was compressed into one level only, such as Amazon.com. And as Amazon began to expand, people found the convenience of buying through Amazon rather than going to the store, and merchandise was available, the same brand names I could buy, sometimes even cheaper. So if you look at the Amazon growth last quarter was $75 billion, and they've added more and more products and services. And therefore, especially shopping goods, where you have no time to go to the shopping centers, you have a crowding takes place, especially in Thanksgiving and the Christmas selling, which is a big selling. That was a key casualty. So that was continuing. And now with the lockdown, it continued even more.
Are some companies doing better than others in managing this transition?
The companies that are doing better than others are those who had some time ago decided they will have to be omni-channel, as they call it, which means I can sell the merchandise online and I can deliver to your home, or you can come and pick it up at the store like Best Buy has done, for example, or you can actually, in fact, browse in the store itself, any way you want to do it. So those who were willing to and able to invest to go online were able to transition the change. Because you do have the warehousing facilities in the back. You do have the supply function is very key in retailing. You have your suppliers lined up. It's a question of logistics and executing properly. So I think it worked out pretty well.
How is this different? I mean, there's always been transition in retailing. When I was growing up in Atlanta, you know, Rich's and Davison's were the big stores in Atlanta, and there was Woolworths all over town. And all three of those have disappeared. I mean, how is this different than that?
That one disappearance is because of the move in America toward more and more people living in suburbs. And as people began to move in suburbs, at one time, we did shopping, sleeping, and work all at the one place, usually downtown. You remember old days, that's how really retailing began. We had the downtown one general store, and there was a chain called Woolworth, W.W. Woolworth. There was another chain called S.S. Kresge, and there was a third chain called W.T. Grant. People lived there, they worked there. It is still true in a small town where you have one general store, The general store actually will be also a bus depot for the bus that drive through, in that from one town to the other. It'll be also everything, pretty much. It is one location, and there will be smaller shops like barber shops nearby, which is basically Dollar General phenomenon nowadays in rural towns. It is how Walmart began in small towns, but much better merchandise, more things. So Woolworth, and they all went away, pretty much. That was very fascinating. I'm so sorry, I'm struggling with my problems here in my devices, okay? So,
Okay.
so
Don't worry, we can hear you. So
as it went to the suburbs, so and most of the suburbs gained with popularity because the schools, they started better schools, for example. Downtown was expensive. And with that, the retail stores began to move, especially Sears began to start shopping centers. Sears was so smart, so smooth, so good after the highways were built, they decided to put the shopping mall very convenient, allow their competitors like a JCPenney to be also an anchor store, leveraging the infrastructure, and the rest is history.
and now Sears is history.
Now Sears. Yes.
Is there a difference between the giant regional malls like Lenox Square and the smaller malls at the freeway exits and the strip malls? I mean, are the big regional malls going to survive?
Big regional malls probably will have to transition to something else. In general, strip malls are ahead of the time. Strip malls, from selling branded merchandise, began to sell more discounted factory outlet merchandise. As you can see, quite a few strip malls like North DeKalb Mall, where I live near in Decatur, you can feel that thing pretty much. And they're surviving for a while because it's a lower rent now.
Mm-hmm.
The real in strip malls is the value of the land itself. So many strip malls are saying, if we can't survive, we will basically sell the land, make it into a multi-purpose condominium, for example. You live there, there are small shops nearby, which is already happening in towns like Decatur, Georgia, in Atlanta.
Mm-hmm.
So there's one way out for them. Quite a few are also going to become from selling merchandise to selling services. Many of the strip malls, which are ahead of the curve in decline, basically survive on movies and on popcorns and anything that you can eat, like restaurants, the food court. I think
Mm-hmm.
that is, so more and more they will shift towards services malls, and many large land tract malls, because they have a good infrastructure, will become eventually recreation malls, where you do jogging, you do sports, athletics, you have an arena, for example, because the land mass is pretty out there. Lenox Mall is different because it is a high density in a small geography, pretty much. In that case, they are more likely to become a mixed mall, some merchandise, great food court, lots of restaurants, but also professional services. Dentistry, for example, medical services, for example, urgent care. They'll have to bring more and more professional services who are willing to pay rent that is possible for such a luxurious shopping mall.
Can you talk for a second about banks? The banks have their retail operations, multi branches all over town. What's the future of that?
The branch banking, physical banking is on its way out. It's very expensive. If you want to deposit a check through the teller, it's going to cost you about $4 and $5 to the bank, total cost, because the physical location, the people, if you amortize. If you did it on an ATM machine, it may be down to about $1 or something. But if you do it by scanning on online banking, it costs very minimal. So banks are understanding that their future does not lie with physical retailing bank, except for commercial properties, commercial customers. A large automobile dealer, for example, you bring in lots of checks, lots of cash, whatever you bring in there, and you have transactions which are above and beyond just deposit and withdrawal. You may have overdraft transactions, you may have payroll transactions, etc. So you have one location where you provide a lot of services to these commercial customers primarily. Consumer customers, there are very few with the next generation who are willing even to go to the bank. My kids, for example, just don't go physically to a branch. Now, I like to go, my wife likes to go. We chat with the teller, for example. They know who we are, all the stuff. That is on its way out, except for a small percentage of people. And because of that, Charles, online banking people are gaining enormous number of new customers, whether those are Capital One, for example, which is a credit online banking, becoming very similar to what happened to property casualty insurance in the early days, where companies like Geico, Progressive became much more important than agent-based services like State Farm or Allstate, for example.
Doesn't that disadvantage the small businesses, the startups that don't have the big accounts with the big giant banks? If community banks disappear, won't they be disadvantaged?
I was not talking about community banks. I was talking about primarily with multiple branches. And when they do merger, for example, between two banks, as it happened 2008, 2009, very clearly they consolidated the branches. If there were branches in the same location by two banks after merger, they said, we don't need both of them. We can survive with one of them, for example. Right? This consolidation of the operations and the cost of doing business. The community banks will grow actually, whether those are credit union banks, because they are very different categories. You know, I have a theory about every business is more like a shopping mall. You have the anchor stores like Sears, JCPenney, Macy's, then you have the specialty retailing. And the two are very different. The anchor stores are volume driven primarily, low margin, high volume. That's how they make money. Specialty stores is opposite, high margin, selective customers, low volume. You always have a demand for community banks, no matter where you go. Even after all this big rationalization of 2008 and 9 financial crisis, continuing consolidation as it is happening with SunTrust and BB&T in Atlanta area, for example, and now Truist is a new bank created. A lot of rationalization, cost reduction will happen, however they do it. Especially in the IT area, there's a lot more capability to consolidate big operations. But at the same time, you will see community banks growing.
How do you see the restaurant business going?
Restaurant business is, there are three major scenarios. The biggest ones are related to the large franchises like McDonald's, Burger King, Kentucky Fried Chicken, you know, or Pizza Hut, Yum brands, right? In many ways. Those will find that some of their own franchisees cannot survive. The problem is not with the franchise brand name, but the franchisee who simply says, I don't have enough cash flow. I'm not getting anything. The coronavirus and the COVID-19 has given the final push. The problem is that most of them do not have enough cash reserves. You have to pay up front quite a lot. You are not collecting unless the retail customer pays you. So they don't have the financial strength to weather the storm, essentially. So many of the franchisees, if they are allowed to, can simply say, I close the stores. Nothing new, by the way. That happened with the automobile dealership in the first energy crisis. And therefore, the dealer, General Motors or Ford, will say multiple brands we have, GMS, Chevrolet, Pontiac, will allow you to consolidate. Now you see mega auto retailers.
Right.
In each, right? So, yeah, so that's one thing is consolidation more and more of the big franchise operations. They have leveraged quite a lot because they're cheap money. So that leverage is the other problem that they're facing. That ratio is very high. You go to the other extreme, there's a mom and pop retailer, a restaurant. And a mom and pop restaurant, it all depends upon how much cautious they have been about cash flow. If they had enough cash flow to survive 3 months, 6 months, 1 year, they will continue operating. In fact, they can renegotiate the lease because the landlord is hurting right now. Everybody will support them to continue. But if you don't have the cash flow beyond 3-4 months, you have to close it down. You are going to get that reaction. There will be some restaurant casualty. But the good thing about restaurant is that once it closes, the property is still very valuable because it is designed with kitchens, serving capacity, etc. another restaurant comes in there at a lot lower rent than before, or buy out the property itself. So it revitalizes. It's much better than the big franchises.
The phenomenon you're describing, is it simply a North American phenomenon or is this global?
I think the phenomenon is more global than we think, although Europeans don't have, like we have, mega department stores. And they do have a Carrefour out of France, but IKEA to some extent out of Sweden and Denmark, but it's very limited. We really went into huge scale, very large scale in multiple locations, like a Sears, Roebuck, JCPenney, etc. They still have very much boutique and galleries. When you walk into the European cities like Brussels, for example, or any of the German towns, you will see you have to go through narrow streets, and then there are boutique shops still. Boutique shops are family-run businesses, which is a very important phenomenon because many of these family-run businesses are multi-generational, and they have enough wealth set aside anyhow, and therefore they are likely to continue. So the casualty will be much greater in America or in newer countries and cities like Singapore and Dubai, which are more modern, very high level, high scale phenomenon. So if you look at Dubai, the retail scenario, especially shopping centers there, they're under a lot of pressure, as is Singapore right now.
Healthcare has become a retail operation. You know, we see these little, Emory healthcare, urgent care all over the world now, and certainly all over Atlanta. How does this figure in to what you're discussing?
Healthcare, the notion is that there's a whole problem of accessibility and affordability. Affordability comes from the insurance and how much they pay to the provider. Accessibility is just being in the queue just to get a normal checkup appointment. And it's very expensive for the clinic or the hospital to provide those services, which are routine in many ways, or some emergency. They also have a pressure of having too many people come to emergency rooms for things that really do not require emergencies because they have no other place to go. And they have to accept them as patients. So it's a very costly phenomenon, both for the patient as well as, in fact, for the service provider. Urgent cares came in the process. It's nothing new, by the way. Urgent first came in the 80s. We used to call doc in a box, kind of a stuff. 800-900 doctor in a box, like a Jack in the Box food franchise, and they all collapsed at that time because they couldn't sustain themselves. Today it has become much more viable, first of all. We have more people with no health insurance, surprisingly, as we have grown the economy for whatever reason. So they are the people who are simply saying, I'll pay out of my pocket, as many other countries do. So, but more importantly, Charles, I think for the first time with COVID-19 and social distancing, doing now telehealth through Zoom technology will be very impactful because it's a win-win. Patients love it. Unless it's absolutely necessary, you don't have to.
Great.
It works very well. You are able to see the doctor is able to see you, etc., except feel, see, touch kind of stuff. And you have, if you have a skin disorder, you can send a photo ahead of time. So it's almost being there. And it's a lot more productive for the healthcare provider. The doctor is kept busy forever because all the time between one patient to the other goes away in the process. So I think telehealth will become much more mainstream now than ever before.
We've got a question here from Joe Bankoff, one of our board members, and he wants to know, can you compare Amazon to the Sears and Roebuck catalog from the early 20th century?
Joe, that's a great question. My memory lane went back to actually Sears catalog. We all used to get the catalog twice a year. It was basically a product comparison for price. You wanted to make sure that that product and the price, can I shop around or I don't need to shop and just order from Sears. Sears legacy is so fascinating. We should take about 30 seconds to 40 seconds on that one. Sears was not only the largest retailer ever, but they offered services. They offer financial services. Allstate Insurance was a part of Sears, for example. They built homes. They offer services at home. And somehow they decided they'll be primarily merchandise oriented. And by the way, even merchandise, about 10 years ago or so, $24 billion merchandise division before they went private by some private equity guy investing, 64% of the profit came from two services, no merchandise. One was credit card. They had the largest credit card. 15 million households had a Sears credit card, much bigger than Visa and MasterCard. And of course, second one was services guarantees, extended warranty. So they sold more hardware than soft goods, like clothing, etc. They sold lots of appliances. Sears has an enormous set of brands. Value of Sears is in those brands. So that catalog was an absolutely brilliant strategy. And Sears was pretty good in mail order business, although JCPenney eventually became much bigger in mail order because they encouraged more mail order shipment, return policy, etc. But Sears was very big in mail order return. They bought, I think, LL Bean or some company, which was a mail order company.
Right.
But eventually they couldn't survive. So Joe, thank you for that question. It goes back to my memory lane. You're right.
One of the things that is Goizueta and the Robinson College of Business and business schools around the country teach is how not to be the Sears, right? How not to be the company that holds on to the past and is incapable of innovating. What's the mindset that allows some companies to see that our technology, a COVID pandemic, is a time to change as opposed to others who just say, well, if we just get through this, we'll be okay?
That's a very important question. Actually, I wrote a book on that one, Why Good Companies Fail. And in my research analysis, I found good companies fail because either they're unwilling to change when the ecosystem has dramatically changed by technology, competition, globalization, whatever it is, or they're unable to change. And I found fascinating inability to change. So the CEO, even an outside person brought in, is saying, we need to change. There's a sense of urgency, but the company is not able to change. So I began to analyze that. And I found that unwillingness comes from the culture, the leader, for example. Those are the key ingredients. If there's a culture that says we have done very well in the past, this is one more encounter we will go through, we'll survive. So they are not willing to change. That's very important. Legacy becomes a curse, essentially. Incumbency is a curse. The unable to change has more to do with regulation on the one hand. In some industries, it is highly regulated, like banking, for example, or a telephone company. To bring about a change is a harder thing to do. You have to change the regulatory reform, get release, etc. Processes is the biggest one. You hardwire every process as if you are in a brick and mortar situation, and now you are not able to change to the online. So what you have to do is make an acquisition like Walmart has done, a company, jet company or whatever it is, ramp up there so you offer through more and more online as an independent business while you are trying to survive around here.
There's a question here from Rahul Gupta. It says, with Walmart and Target having a home run during COVID-19, how can department stores differentiate themselves from one another?
I think there are two angles about the department stores to differentiate from Walmart and Target. One is to make them more high-tech rather than low-tech, more specialty boutique, especially in the garment business. Now you have these smart mirrors. Actually, the clothing, you can wear it in a digital form, and you can see how it fits. You can do quite a lot of that right in the store itself. Or you can have an artificial robot actually as a greeting, as Lowe's is trying to do very much. A robot is more friendly, more accurate than an associate on the floor, and people like it. I remember my days when a telephone operator was very important, but once we automated the telephone services quite a lot, everything is menu driven of some sort, we got used to it, and we like it because sometimes we did not like the snootiness of the operator, the noise that is going on, they're all laughing in the back, etc. So in many ways, the technology has become a lot more friendly than people. So you have all those experiments going on. As retail stores have to become from low tech to high tech, and they have to actually offer, it's not selling merchandise, but selling all the value-added services, financing, for example, as I talked about, home delivery, for example, as I talked about. I mean, airlines have learned very well after tough times, while the price is low to bring people to fly, but they're unbundling everything. I have to pay for my baggage now. I have to pay for my seats even in some places, right? Reserved seats. You know, they're more creative about unbundling. I think many of the retail stores will have to also learn how to unbundle all the services they offer. Why should the exchange be pretty much what you do? They explain a reason. There has to be a penalty of some sort, and customers get used to that pretty much. So services, value-added services, there are plenty of opportunities to expand for the brick and mortar retailers, as well as, in fact, high tech and low tech.
Here's a question from Ankita Tomar, who's a PhD student from the University of Delhi.
Yeah.
So it's the middle of the night there, so I'm glad she's up late. As retailing undergoes major changes amid COVID, how can PhD students researching consumer behavior redirect their research problems to deal with the changes retail is facing amid COVID?
Yeah. No, I think it's a great question, first of all. It gives more research opportunities than ever before. More and more as retailing is going online all over the world. In fact, the growth of e-commerce is about 15, 17%, whereas retailing in general before the COVID incident, COVID is about 3.4%, somewhere in that area. It's a big economy, by the way. 30% of the total GDP is all about retailing in many ways. It's one of the largest concentrations in the consumer market. I think one has to say, how does a company learn to survive? Location, is it an advantage? I know in the beginning we always say location, 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 but it's more convenience, convenience, convenience. It is more customer experience, etc. So that people want to come for enjoyment. Starbucks has done a great job. It's not just the coffee alone, but the experience. I can hang around there, and if I'm sort of an entrepreneur and have no place to go, I can do my business there. You know, pretty much. It's my business, as people do, as B. Dalton bookstores try to do, you know, Barnes and Noble tries to do, where you can lounge around and read the books. Hopefully you will buy kind of a stuff. So mom and pop retailers will go through a lot of changes. I also find that surprisingly in India, this is much better opportunity because you have these very small provision stores near the neighborhoods. Quite a few are surviving right now on, surprisingly, on selling cellular telephones and SIM cards, which is a high profitable business for them, as opposed to selling groceries, for example, or snacks. So they will transform the merchandise they offer because they have a multi-generational relationship between themselves and the consumers in that community by and large.
Here's a question from Him Shaw. As what are 3 things smaller businesses can do to survive?
Very simple. Conserve cash as much as you can, which means, and most of the retailers surprisingly are pretty relaxed about getting money out of their own customers. They allow financing. So now you become a little more aggressive in your collections to say, I need the money as much to survive as you need the money, right? So that's clearly one. Slow down the payments, especially payments to large enterprises who have a bandwidth to survive. So electric utility bills, the telephone bills, sometimes the mortgages, the lease, the landlords, if they're large landlords, they're all willing to say, I'll give you 90 days runway to survive at least, right? That's the second one. The third one is that if you are a person who has been able to save money for the future, you need to dip into your savings. Short term, you have to survive that way, pretty much. Last thing that I recommend strongly about a small retailer is that do an inventory checkup. You have a lot of dead capital sitting in your inventory. You don't need all that SKUs, as we call them, stock keeping units. Do a clearance, like we do garage sale. Okay, we have too much junk out there. A retail store has too much junk out there, especially those mom and pop small guys carry everything. And I go to some of those retail stores and I find 1949, 50 little parties still they are having it. But you take a tough stand and say, I cannot serve all the customers anymore. I need to reduce my inventory SKUs and go for mainstream items where I have a higher turnover, repeat buying again and again by the people. So Ace Hardware stores, kinds of people who have everything when you walk in, no matter what you're looking for in the home repair maintenance business, they have to take a tough stand on their inventory management. And the last thing is to really see how you can deliver your products online. In other words, customer will not come to the retailer because of the lockdown procedures worldwide or stay in shelter kinds of procedures we have. So retailer has to go to the customer, which happens in digital products like books, for example. It happens with movies, as you know. So Disney just announced they will have a release of their movie on Alexander online, streaming first, 1 year ahead, even because they have to earn some money someplace. And you cannot have repeat movies all the time. People get tired of that one. So I think one has to improvise. So how do you go to the customer will be very key, as grocery stores are doing quite well with Instacart, for example, or their own delivery system. Apple has its own delivery system. I ordered a new computer in the local Apple store, I think Lenox Mall, where I live nearby. The lady came and dropped off the computer because they're just sitting idle in some fashion. The store is not working. I think there are many, many ways a small retailer can survive.
That reminds me, when I was a kid, and I'm sure you as well, that there was a truck that used to come by every morning. There was one that would deliver bread, and there was another one that would come by with eggs and dairy products. And they went through the neighborhoods and they had their routes and they dropped off so many bottles of milk every morning.
So do newspapers today. I still get, although they're losing money, I'm sure on that one.
Oh, it's got to kill them. They are losing money on that. Here's the opposite question, and that is, can you list some consumer trends? I mean, we've talked about what businesses ought to be doing. What are consumer trends? What are the consumers doing different? Are there 3 or 4 or 5 things that we should be making note of?
The one thing we have to all understand is that a typical family is becoming more and more what I call a roommate family. Because it's a dual income earning family now, working by the wife is becoming more and more necessity. If you live in a metro area, for example, single wage will not survive you because your operating expenses are much higher. You are eating out a lot more than ever before. You have to have a babysitting now. Somebody does it, so it goes on. The cost of operations has gone up. You need a 2 income. When you have 2 income family, you have a problem with the time. There's a time shortage and a time shift. Monday through Friday, nobody's at home primarily. So all the delivery people have to change, repair maintenance people, etc. Even in the family, we don't have time, except right now under COVID-19, we were basically forced to do it. People otherwise eat meals like it's a chore. They barely get together, very fast eating, and then each one goes in their own corner. Somebody's doing YouTube watching, somebody does text messaging, somebody's watching television. We are living more and more like roommates. And that's a very key phenomenon we have to understand, that the consumption will be more individualistic than a household or a shared consumption. Eating out will be a much bigger phenomenon because the younger generation is not trained in cooking, cleaning, and childcare. They struggle with that thing. They don't know how to do it. So buying what you used to make will become more and more buying phenomenon. That's one key trend you will see. Second trend, mostly in advanced countries, is aging of the population. So when you age, your needs become different by definition. The 2 most common needs arise, which drives the GDP of the nation in many ways. Those are the new, both are services, which is health preservation and wealth preservation. So health preservation and wealth preservation are growing faster than the economy. I mean, the healthcare segment was only about 8 or 10% of the economy in 1980. It is almost 14, 15% of the economy, cost more than $3 trillion. Participating in those would be very important. How would you participate? So those are the growth engines of the world. Now that to me is another second area that comes about aging of the population. And I've done a lot of research on that, and I find fascinating. When you are young, contact sports is great. Football, basketball, etc. When you grow older, it hurts a lot. So you become more a spectator rather than actual active participation. So I forecasted that the tennis will be on their way out also. It's non-contact, very strenuous on aging knees. You can't play tennis. The golf has become the most recreational public golf courses, which will be on its way out. Eventually, it will be just jogging and walking. We'll have walking Olympic tournaments, just as we have for jogging and long distance running, for example, marathon races. It's fascinating. So aging is a second major area. In advanced countries, it's common. Japan is the most aging nation. Watch things happening in Japan more and more. And they will be lead nation using technology to serve the society. In Japan, they are basically using lots and lots of smart robots. They are your helpers at home. Like we have a personal digital attendant, in our cell phones. This is really physical person who comes in, and people express more love and affection to something that's artificial than they do to real people. I have a whole presentation called When Artificial Becomes Real. It's fascinating. It is happening now. It's not like fantasy. I was going to talk about best movie. One of the movies about retailing that I watched was Tom Cruise had a movie called Minority Report, which shows sort of future of retailing. When you walk through a glass window, automatically, because you are there, they know everything about you, which is happening now. They will say, how about this merchandise? Because they know you repeat purchasing and they intensify to buy when and there. Some other person walking sees a very different merchandise in the same store. It's all virtual in many ways. So here is the ultimate thing. Now people are having virtual girlfriends. Absolutely. And these are virtual girlfriends. They have a relationship, and the girlfriend would be basically artificial intelligence chatbot. And the girlfriend would tell you, I really enjoy the ocean. Can you take me to the ocean? So people drive to the ocean and talk with a chatbot girlfriend and basically says, are you happy here or not? They're making proposals and marrying an artificial being, for example. This is in the software side, but there will be hardware robots like people who are becoming your personal companions at home. Very fascinating scenarios, which is the aging of the population that's happening. And the third area is very important for us to understand from a demographic viewpoint is that we have a very strong decline of the middle class with the rise of two extreme classes. We have more and more rich people and we have more and more poor people. The typical middle class created by the industrialization from agriculture, where factory workers were the dominant population, earn about the same wages. And there was no extreme payment to a CEO, for example, even though you run a large corporation and all that stuff. I think that's the key area. Because what happens because of that is that the extreme price point is much better. Lowest no-frill price, like Aldi, which is doing quite well in America, for example, as they've done in Germany, and you get most luxurious products. There is no upper limit of price on any product that I can find. Just when you think this price is so outrageous, there is even higher price point. Middle price point companies and middle price point retailers will collapse.
Wow. Well, that was 3 fabulous minutes there. I'm taking notes as fast as I can. Thank you. But before we go, can you talk for 90 seconds about what's happening in India? I know you've got good connections, lots of friends, in touch with a lot of people, not on retailing, but what's happening with COVID. I see in the news that increase in the number of cases has just taken off exponentially.
The numbers will take off quite a lot because the population density is so high, especially in metro areas. And given that there is already, in fact, some sort of a passing on or the infection that takes place, government has come down some of the toughest measures for lockdown, as they call it. You cannot move outside the building itself. You can go to the terrace, open terrace, or you can be in the garden of the building, but you cannot go outside. They're trying very hard. The biggest worry in India is that how long can this continue? People will not like to be locked in that much. So how do you release gradually? And I think the Indian government has done a good job based upon scientific work that will create 3 zones, the red zone, the orange zone, whatever they call it, and the green zone. And the real revitalization, surprisingly, in India will happen more in the agricultural sector. In rural population, it is not spreading as much because the density is low, first of all. For whatever reason, it's not going to spread as much, even though workers who come from rural population to the urban to work have all fled back to their own hometowns. Very fascinating. So the spread will be there, but not to the, it's like our Nebraska and North Dakota for us, low population density, where you have a concentration of a factory, you might catch it, but in India, we don't have that as much. So agricultural sector will do very well because they've got a very good crop. It depends on the crop. Monsoon, they're expecting quite well good monsoon. So to me, agricultural sector will revitalize much sooner. Services sector will definitely revitalize because services I can perform in a virtual or a digital environment. So all of the major IT services, professional services will all distribute themselves properly. So that'll be fine. Factories would be the hardest one to change because factories are organized by machines for high density. So how do you make sure that government provides guidelines about the safety, etc. by and large? Recovery in India will be faster than the rest of the world once it gets out of the coronavirus or COVID phenomenon for 2-3 reasons. As I mentioned, agricultural, but still as an informal economy that chugs along. So it's not even counted. So that's going to continue. And now there's a very strong incentive or at least a try very hard to have as many as 1,000 American corporations to shift their capacity from China, at least part of the capacity in manufacturing, at least some to India. And already traction is taking place, even in manufacturing, which is interesting because India is a large market. It is the second largest in consumer products for anything. Appliances is LG and Samsung that dominate, for example. Automobile is a big market. It just goes on and on. So India is cell phones, everything is a big market. So consumer demand is one. Second area India is going to go post-COVID is everything about public infrastructure. More ports, seaports, more airports, more roads, for example, more railways, including modernizing the railways. Public infrastructure, which will all come from private-public partnerships like sovereign funds typically, or World Bank kinds of institutions that can put a long-term capital behind. And also you will see defense, very large sector, and they are privatizing the defense sector. That will become a trigger point for the economy. And it's revitalization or growth back again will come from the high-end engineering, more knowledge worker type, as opposed to factory workers traditionally, as it happened in China. So there's a difference in the way Chinese growth came as they went from communism to capitalism. India's growth will come more at the high end first and low end later on. Labor is not the advantage of India. Automation is the advantage.
If you can stay just a minute or two long, I told you 45 minutes, we've already gone over, but if you can stay in, I've got one great last question to you from Mubarak from India, who starts off by congratulating you on winning the Padma Bhushan Award.
Thank you.
The question is, what have you learned during this crisis, Dr. Sheth, that you never expected? I mean, what has surprised you?
Two things. One has been how much improvisation humans can do. I was absolutely blown away that a Hindu-Indian wedding, which requires hundreds and hundreds of people, 400, 500 to 1,000 people, like is a minimum requirement in a wedding, and everybody enjoys all the stuff. Now we had a sidewalk weddings in America, where people came by driving in the car, for example. We have the traditional Hindu wedding. The priest is there, the bride, the groom is there, and the parents are there, and that's it, nobody is nearby, right? So that was an improvisation. I even participated in one death because the death happened in a hospital in our family. The body was taken by the funeral home, cremation took place. Nobody could go anywhere near. It was not possible, they just wouldn't allow it. Ashes came, but there was a memorial. And for the first time, because of the lockdown, as well as no travel here, we could not travel, we all participated by Zoom. More people showed up. The improvisation again. And some of the improvisations will become great innovation opportunities And a good entrepreneur will say, well, it worked. People enjoyed it. They liked it. How can I make a business out of it? This ties back to the Indian culture called jugaad, which is sort of a derogatory word in many ways. Jugaad says, do it under constraints, something you will do that constraints, you will bypass the constraints somehow. Do more with less kind of a notion. But it also means bypass any social norms, rules, regulations, just do it, kind of a stuff attitude. You know? So we'll see more improvisation as a way of creating innovation. It's a very key change. And it's going to happen worldwide because everybody has experienced the same thing on a global basis. So I see the rise of strong innovation like the Silicon Valley rose in the 80s or the 70s. We'll see out of home improvisations. Talent will be discovered more than ever before. You don't need American Idol or Indian Idol anymore. I think the world has discovered these things. So you see, go on a YouTube and see one of these little crazy things people do, and you get multi-million followers, you know, and you become an influencer marketer, or you create a product from it. So to me, that's key factor. The second factor, small one, is, are we going to go back to the same way like a roommate family, or have we really learned what we were missing? And there's a fundamental law, which is very interesting. Every time we do it on a daily necessity, when we give it up, it always comes back as a hobby. Hunting, fishing, gardening, baking breads, cooking. So today, while we are cooped up in the family, everybody's making banana breads. So everybody has a grandma's recipe of some sort. Some of them may become actually very mainstream, you know. It's so fascinating. So to me, hobbies are becoming now back again. You appreciate the hobbies that you have. And it's happening with Food Channel, which is very popular. So the next hobby may be whatever that turns out to be, because we don't clean our homes very well. So does home cleaning as a hobby business or what? We have to figure out. But that's a key change in terms of the way this particular lockdown, stay in shelter procedures have been imposed for a couple of months, which is a long time. People will find accepting technology much more, even older people like me. We'll all get used to the technology as a, so digital first and physical second is very likely to happen.
Jack, let me thank you. This has been great. I've enjoyed this thoroughly. Our audience has as well. We've got great questions. I've got some I was not able to ask. I want to tell everybody, you should be doing this actually, that if you want the full course on the future in brick and mortar retailing from Dr. Jagdish Sheth, there's a half-hour lecture on YouTube. You've got your own YouTube channel, and I encourage everybody to watch the video. It's called The Future of Brick and Mortar Retailing, High-Tech Experience and Value-Added. High-Tech Experience and Value-Added. So this is be interesting. Please stick around with the World Affairs Council. I've got to do a little bit of advertising now, marketing for the council. Tomorrow at noon, we've got Brad Allison, who's the CEO of a company called AJC International, which really embodies the global food supply chain. They're a middleman. You've never heard of them. If you don't know them, you won't know them until tomorrow. They buy and sell proteins and French fries, oddly enough, in 129 countries and sell them in 129 countries. And we've got the CEO of the company on tomorrow to explain why there is no chicken in my supermarket, where I went yesterday. So this is going to be terrific. Next week on May 19th at noon, we've got Mary Street, who's an executive with BP, talking about the energy industry with oil prices at rock bottom. On May 20th at noon, we've got Fred Hochberg talking about his new book, Trade is Not a Four-Letter Word. So what's happening to globalization in response to COVID? On May 22nd, we've got Mastering Leadership in Times of Crisis with Dorier Underwood Consulting. May 28th, we've got Stacey Abrams who is going to be speaking. It's a members only program. We're working with Governor Brian Kemp's staff on a date for the governor to join us. I encourage everyone here, whether you're in Istanbul or Delhi or
Definitely.
Atlanta, to please join the World Affairs Council, make a donation, sponsor a program. I can't think of a better graduation gift for your nephew than sponsoring a program in honor of your niece or nephew. Please contact me, and if you've got an idea for a program, contact me. Let me know. We're looking for great speakers like Dr. Jagdish. Jag, thank you so much. This has been terrific.
Thank you, Charles. I enjoyed very much also. Thank you. Sorry for the little technical glitch up there.
We've all forgotten about it. We've taken care of it. So it's great. It's great seeing you again. Good. Thank you all. Good afternoon.